You're listening to Investigation Insiders by Integris Intelligence.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Investigation Insiders. This is Forhad. I hope you are all well and safe. I can't believe it is near the end of another year. We're recording our final episode of 2025, and I'm really happy to say that my coworker and compadre Joe Morrow is joining me for this very, very special episode. How are you, Joe?
I'm good. How can I pass having a chance to speak to our special guest here today?
You led me right into it. So we are extremely excited to have our friend Seamus McElearney join us today. How are you, Seamus? Thanks so much for joining us.
It's great to be here, and it's great to talk to some old friends here.
Well, so speaking of old friends, just by way of background for everyone listening, I first met Seamus through our mutual friend and mentor, Kevin Donovan, while he was still with the Bureau. And we obviously hit it off right away and have been friends since. We've also had the pleasure of working together on many things since he left the Bureau, and needless to say, I'm very grateful for the friendship, Seamus.
Yes, we have a great partnership since I retired from the Bureau, and I continue to use your great firm.
Thank you. And so Joe, on the other hand, has known Seamus for a little bit longer. Joe, you want to talk about that?
Sure, yeah. Seamus and I go back all the way, I believe it's 2002 when I joined the Bonanno squad at the FBI. He was
Yes,
already
good
on the
old
squad.
C10.
Pizza, and so he was already there, set the tone for me. He helped guide me learning the structure because I had a lot to learn. I hadn't done organized crime at that point at all. So it was a pleasure to meet Seamus, and that whole squad was amazing. So every time somebody from that squad comes up, I have to be involved somehow. Brings me back.
It was a great squad.
You
Yeah.
guys, and we're going to get into it a little bit on this episode, but you guys did some meaningful work too. So I think that helps bring people closer together as well. Sometimes pushes them apart, but in your case, it brought you guys closer together.
Yes,
Uh,
it was a great time, and it was a great bond of people that worked together.
Yep, yep. So I'm gonna start, and then I'm gonna pass it to Joe to get to the meat of our conversation today. But Seamus, perhaps I mean a lot of people are gonna know you, but can you start with a high level overview of your background?
Sure. I was born in New York City, raised in the Bronx. I went to grammar school at St. Brendan's, and then in high school, I went to Cardinal Spellman in the Bronx. I went to college at Iona College, studied finance there. And then after I got through with school, I got into banking, into auditing, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do there. I didn't feel like that was a passion for me. And I actually met an FBI agent, and the job just seemed so great to me. And it was just every day seemed very, very, like one day you could be speaking to a CEO, the next day you could be doing a surveillance. And I was just intrigued by that. So I decided to try to apply for the FBI. This was in like 1996 or so. And if anyone knows, during the 1990s, there was a hiring freeze with the FBI. So as soon as the freeze was over, there was a lot of people that were applying for the FBI at that time. What I was told back then is in New York City, there was probably about 100,000 applicants just in New York. So my odds were kind of stacked against me, and I was constantly told that you're never going to get in because I didn't have any background related to the service at all. So at that time, they said there was like a 2 or 3% chance to get in. So I applied, and there's a long process back then. I think it was close to 2 years, and I was fortunate enough to get selected. And I went for training in February of 1998.
And then you were with the Bureau for how long? And then and then I guess post Bureau you went to uh I guess the corporate world, right?
Right. So I was with the Bureau from February of 1998 all the way up until April of 2019. Once I retired from the FBI, I actually went to back to banking, and I was with Signature Bank and then Flagstar Bank for about 4.5 years. And after that, for the last 2 years, I've been global head of security for a financial firm.
Um, you know, it's interesting. I've had a chance to listen to you quite a bit. And, one of the interesting things about whenever you talk about any work that you've done, right, you always talk about the team. And so, can you talk a little bit about why it's so important to emphasize that aspect of it whenever you talk about the work that you've been involved with?
Well, especially with organized crime, if you ever hear someone said it's just me, you should run from them because it's always a team. It takes a group of people to get the job done. And that's the way it's always been throughout my whole career. It's always teamwork. And that's always something that I've stressed. And even after I have retired from the Bureau, that's something that I stress. It's never just one person. As I always say, there's no I in team, right? So it's always important to stress the team. And it's always to make sure that you try to recognize the team. And that's what I've constantly done throughout my career.
Sure, sure. So, can you talk about some of your mentors over the years?
Well, I think the biggest mentors I've had have been with the FBI, and I was just extremely blessed to tell you the truth. I think when I got to C10, I got to C10 in December of 1999. Even before that, what happens is I graduated from the academy in May of 1999, and they put you through a rotation. So when I was on that rotation, one of the things that they do is they put you on surveillance, and I was assigned to a team called SO2. And SO2 was led by a team leader named Joe Scanza, who was great. And at that point, we were investigating, or we were told to surveil the DeCavalcante family. So I started to hear about an agent named George Hanna. And you really don't have a say in the bureau. They assign you as to what squad you're going to go to. And at that point in time, I was fascinated by organized crime. I would read up on organized crime, and I was trying to get to an organized crime squad. And I was blessed to be sent to C10. And when I got to C10, lo and behold, they were actually starting to investigate the DeCavalcante family. And one of my mentors was George Hanna, and he's an absolute a legend, as if anyone does their background on him. And I was fortunate for him to be my mentor. He took me under his wing, and he really did guide us because as a new agent, you really don't know a lot. And he basically taught me everything that I know. And I give all my credit to him. And one of the specialties of George, which we'll talk about in a minute here, is how to operate a proactive witness. And years later, after we talk about this investigation, I was sent down to the Colombo squad, and I used what George taught me. And we basically, when I was down on that squad, I think the stats are we did 1,800 consensual recordings in 7.5 years, which is an ungodly amount of consensual recordings. And I owe it all to George based upon the early training that he gave me. And then I would say the second mentor that I had would be the supervisor of that squad, Jack Stubing, where Jack Stubing was just someone who believed in me, gave me a chance, and just directed me in like the right way. So those are the two mentors that to this day that I really have deep respect for and kind of guided me in the right direction.
That's really nice to hear. It's interesting. I only recently started asking this question this year, actually, and it's always interesting to hear what people say. But I will say that especially among the FBI agents and frankly all the law enforcement folks that I've had a chance to speak to, the camaraderie between people, the friendship and the, sort of like the working relationship it really is it's a wonderful thing, and it's something that we need to continue replicating going forward so that these same kind of outcomes happen. So I appreciate you
Yes.
sharing that. Joe, do you have any questions or comments on anything
Yeah,
that
yeah.
she
I was
said?
just going to interject myself here.
Yeah.
Yeah, he mentioned two special people that I adore, actually, Jack and George. They were very special to me as well. There's just some leadership, some supervisors that don't just admin and manage what they have to. They're actually there to really train you and bring you up and show you what you really need to know to be a better investigator, analyst, or whatever your position may be. And Seamus referenced two of them. I actually just messaged Jack recently. I saw him on a FBI special regarding Joey Macedo. So I was like, oh my God. So it's a good thing that you still revere them as a lot of people who worked with them do as well.
And they basically were the base for my career for the rest of my type of working career. I would say that I used what they taught me 25 years ago to this day.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So just to introduce what we're gonna talk about today. So obviously you wrote a book recently. Um, well, you didn't write it recently. It's a work in progress over many years, but it got published recently, I should say. And so we want to talk about um, dismantling the real Sopranos, obviously a reference to the HBO TV show. So I'm going to pass it to Joe and let you guys talk and step away for a minute and just listen to you guys and enjoy the conversation. So Joe,
Sure.
you're it.
All righty. This is new for me here. So I wasn't there when you first joined, so I'm interested to hear, I'm sure our listeners are as well, how you first got assigned, because the Cavalcantes were not the primary purpose of the squad itself. So I'd be interested to hear how that came about and how you became the manager or the handler for that investigation. Can you just
Okay,
provide a
so
high level overview if you can?
how this case starts is I am going to training in February of 1998. The two events that kind of start the case happened on January 14th of 1998, where three people try to rob the World Trade Center. They do rob the World Trade Center, but unfortunately, they take their mask off as soon as they get out of the bank there, and they are caught pretty quickly. If I remember correctly, two people are caught that day. The third person had fled to New Mexico and was caught within 2 days. The mastermind behind that was a guy named Ralph Guarino. And Ralph Guarino saw that the walls were starting to close in, and he called George Hanna. And George Hanna is such a great agent, he immediately decided to turn Ralph into a proactive witness. What I mean by a proactive witness is he was going to keep him on the street and make consensual recordings. So that's the first aspect of this investigation. The second aspect of the investigation is, I believe, 9 days later, a guy named Joseph Canigliaro was killed. He was a DeCavalcante associate who was confined to a wheelchair based upon a shooting that took place in the 1970s when him and a DeCavalcante soldier named James Gallo went to go collect loan shark money. James Gallo accidentally shot him and paralyzed him. No hard feelings about that, just the nature of the business that they're in. So the reason that he was killed, though, was because he tortured his crew and they had just had enough of him and they wanted him killed. So those are the two events that start this investigation. And as I just mentioned, that was before I actually was even going to training. So I don't get to the squad until December of 1998. At that point, the case is already going on for 12 months. George is proactively running Ralph during that time. When I get to the squad, as you just and you just said there, Joe, was the squad was tasked with investigating the Bonanno family. When you have a proactive witness, you just never know where he's going to go. Actually, Ralph led George and others to the Brooklyn faction of the DeCavalcante family, which we really didn't know about. And that's how the New York FBI starts to work the DeCavalcante family. When I'm sent to that squad, at that time, half the squad was working the Bonanno family and half the squad was working the DeCavalcante family. And that's what makes C10 such a great squad. And not to fast forward, but C10 basically dismantled two families at the same time. And there was a lot of press, related to the dismantling of these two families, but I don't think the press really put together that it was the same squad. And that was one of the reasons why I wrote the book. But just to stay there for a minute, is I got tasked with doing the DeCavalcante side of the family. So we basically run Ralph, or George runs Ralph for almost 2 years, up until December of 1999. And that's when we have our first takedown. And the reason that we have our takedown there is because there's whispers as to why Ralph, who was the mastermind behind that robbery in January of 1998, why hasn't he been arrested? And there's talk about possibly killing him. So for his safety, George has to take him off the street.
Gotcha. So that started the whole aspect of that. So what led us down to, it must have continued then at that point that you then
That's
got,
just a starting point.
yeah, that you then
So,
continued through with meeting your main source there, Mr. Anthony Capo.
right. So what happens is on that date, we arrest 39 people. And as a new agent, you're hoping to be on an arrest. And, usually you're like rear security. And lo and behold, I was tasked with being the team leader for Anthony Capo. Anthony Capo was a violent DeCavalcante soldier from Staten Island, and I was tasked to be the team leader. So my job was to arrest him. At that particular time, Anthony was charged with conspiracy to murder Charlie Majuri and with, I believe it was mail fraud that could lead to stock fraud. So that's what he was charged with, and I was tasked to arrest him.
Ah, so that's where the first connection began.
Yes. Mhm.
You want to dig into a little bit like how at that point when he decided to turn informant, was it at that arrest or was it later on?
Sure. So, there's a lot of planning, as you know, because you've helped us a lot when we do plan arrest.
Mhm.
Background checks where people live, make sure there's not people living downstairs that might be what there might be have a record or there might be a want on them. So there's a lot of planning that goes into that. So when we went to go arrest Anthony Capo, he wasn't at his house. And that was kind of strange. And then his wife said that he was at his mom's house. So that was the first clue that something might be wrong. When
Mhm.
we went, we did arrest him at his mom's house. And this, as I said, he had a bad, uh, I guess, bad reputation of being a violent person, very hated towards law enforcement. And when I met him that day, he just didn't appear that way. He seemed to have a very good relationship with his family. So I had locked him up that day, and then we, got him into the car. I read him his rights. I did my homework on him, where I studied him from head to toe. I knew everything about him, his family, his date of birth, his social security number, the charges against him. So when I would ask him questions, I would already have the answer. So I wanted him to know that I knew everything about him. And then I started the mind chess games, where he was charged, as I just said, conspiracy to murder Charlie Majuri, who at that time was an acting panel boss of the DeCavalcante family, and also with mail fraud. So I read him his rights. He invoked his right to remain silent and his both right to counsel. So at that point, I would just feed him some information, such as I knew that their plan was to ring Charlie Majuri's doorbell and to shoot him right in the face. And when I said that to him, I said, "Don't say anything, just listen to me." Now you have to think, you got to put yourself in his shoes. At that particular time, I'm saying this, and one thing that you learn throughout your career is you never lie to them, because if you lie to them, you're going to lose them. So he knew that was fact. But this is early in the morning, and he's hearing this for the first time, so he doesn't know where this is coming from. So I just gave him like food for thought there. And we spent the entire day together. We bonded that day. We talked sports. We were cordial. And from what I had heard, and he even had told me, like later as we bonded over the years, is that all his interactions with law enforcement were very, uh, I guess, rough. They weren't sincere. There was always like conflict. So I was respectful towards him, and that was something that I learned from George. So because of that, and you're always like thought or taught through life as you get more bees with honey, right? So we he heard that I was very respectful to his stepfather too that day when I met him, like throughout the day, and we just kind of established a bond that day. And then sure enough, I guess it was about a week later, his attorney called me and said he wanted to talk to the government. And that's how it all started. And at that particular time, there wasn't a lot of cooperation from Make guys. I think Sammy cooperated in the early 1990s. And other than that, there wasn't a lot of Make guys that had flipped. And unbeknownst to me, because I'm a new agent, I really don't know, is no one in that family, no made members in that family's 100-year history at that particular time had flipped before. So here I am just thinking I'm doing my job, and I didn't know the ramifications of that we just had a May guy flipped. So his attorney called me that night. I remember in these types of discussions, less is more. So I call the attorney from the Southern District and I tell her she's very paranoid as to what I might have said. So I just said I didn't say much at all. I just said I would call you. And that's what I did. And then it starts the process to proffer him. And that's something about the book where I think we explain the process related to cooperation, the process related to the witness security program, the process related to trials, and even crimes such as like loan sharking. These are things that we get into within the book, which I haven't seen done before.
No, I haven't read the whole book yet. I started it, so now I'm anxious to get into the weeds and the details of it. So I know he was fearful of what the life was going to be, forced him into wanting to cooperate. Is there anything else specific that you think that helped him turn?
Well, he was facing time, so that's one thing. But as I said, up until that point, a lot of May guys had not flipped. A lot of these guys decided not to cooperate with the government and just do their time. So I think it was a combination of letting him know that the charges were really uh, they were solid against him, that there wasn't going to be a way out of it, treating him with respect that, not all law enforcement is going to treat him the way that he was used to being treated, and that I could treat him like a decent person. Another thing that came up was I knew he was a diabetic. So I made sure that if his blood sugar got low, I had orange juice or sugar there. I had like all sorts of chocolate there that day too. So I just treated him like a human being, is what I'm trying to say. So I
Yeah.
think he appreciated that. And that's something that he would say to me later too, that, the way that I treated him had a lot to do with him trying to cooperate with the government. And
All right.
then,
Sorry.
like
Go
what had
ahead.
happened was because of him and where he was positioned in the family was a big deal because at that particular time, he was reporting to Vincent Palermo, who was an acting panel boss, who was really viewed as the boss because he was so violent and hard to control. And then what Anthony does is he creates a spiral effect of cooperation. And then that just opens the floodgates. So we go from having no one cooperate, no made member to cooperate for 100 years, to Anthony cooperating with the government, to basically opening the floodgates to I think, over a 2 year time period or less than 2 years, we almost have 7 people cooperate with the government.
That's a big deal. Were
And
there
then what was great for trial was we were able to put on the stand the whole structure. We were able to put an associate, a soldier, a captain, and the acting panel boss, which was great for trial, all from the same family, which I don't think up until that point in time had been done before. And then,
No,
as
I
I
agree.
said,
I remember hearing all about that.
yeah, and then as I said, at the same time, the other half of the squad, C10, is dismantling the Bonanno family. It was just great stuff. And I've never met a more selfless group of people who had each other's backs day in and day out, just getting the job done. There was no ego. We just got the job done. It was just great to see. And as I think you said, you got there in 2002. So you were right in the thick of it. So you must have just walked in and been like, just look at these people. They get along so well,
Yeah,
and they're just getting the job done.
that's true. I mean, I came down from working, not I was working 9/11 phone records, hijacker phone records for the previous year. So I was in that headset for such a while there. And then when I needed to change and George Hanna gave me the opportunity to switch gears here, I was like, oh, this is a really smart move because he's a good supervisor. He's a good person. He
Yep.
looks out for his people and the people that are on the squad. I'm like, he put together a pretty good squad here, whether he did it or it just fell into place. It worked out very well. I was
And
so happy to be there.
I think the big thing about George was he cared about his people. And that says a lot. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah,
it's one thing just to be a supervisor, but he cared about us, he protected us, he looked out for us. And I just can't say enough about
I'm gonna have to give George a call now.
him. I sent him a
Um,
text, I think it was last week.
So back to the investigation. Were there any like challenges that you faced during it, like from the FBI internally or from
Well,
the USDA?
when you have a proactive witness, there's a lot that you have to watch out for, right? A, you have to keep the witness safe, right? That's really important. Then there's a lot of just bureau stuff that you have to do related to surveillances and consensual logs. You got to make sure that the recordings are within the Elsher unit in time. You have to make copies for the assistant. And if I remember correctly, I think Ralph made close to 300 recordings. So, and you have to listen to those recordings and you have to try to find that piece of information. And you could listen to a 2 hour tape, which could take you 6 hours to do just to find a little piece of information which you could use for an indictment. So that's a lot. And then you have to transcribe those. So there's a lot of admin work that you have to do. So that's a challenge. And then, just trying to stay on top of that. And as I mentioned before, the stars were just aligned for me when I was going through that rotation to be on SO2. And then SO2 was basically, and you could not do it now, but we actually had a dedicated surveillance team for this investigation. I mentioned Joe like Sconzo before. He was the team leader. So we had SO2 on Ralph all the time. I think I cataloged or was tracking probably almost 1,000 surveillances during that 2 year period because we had multiple shifts on Ralph just to make sure that he was safe. And nothing was better for trial than having a consensual recording, a picture, and a witness. So it was just great. You know what I mean? But there's a lot of work that you do behind the scenes. And then, George has to direct Ralph to collect the evidence, and he's got to make him look like he's still a perp. So there's a fine line that you have to do that. You have to get authorization to do certain things, right? So that he continue to do the criminal acts that he's doing. There's certain things he can and can't do. So those are the challenges that you face there. And then, after I just discussed that there was just that one indictment, Anthony comes on board. He's going to cooperate. That creates a spiral effect of cooperation. We have Anthony Capo flip, then it's Vincent Palermo flip, Victor D. Chiara flips. We then use those three guys' information to get our next round of indictments, which is in October 2000. I think the 25th anniversary just passed. And that was known as the hierarchy arrest, where we arrested the official boss, the two acting panel bosses, the consigliere, a bunch of captains and soldiers, and we arrest associate named Frank Scarabino. And what's important about him is he comes forward and he tells us that there's a contract on Anthony Capo and Anthony Capo's family, and that the DeCavalcante family is going back to the old Sicilian ways of going to hurt law enforcement. So you can use that as a challenge or kind of a jolt. But thankfully, Frank Scarabino came forward with that. And, we always say that hard work leads to good luck. But, thankfully, Scarabino came forward and didn't act upon that. But that created a challenge for us then because now we're not only do we have to try to convince Capo's family to move, but we have to try to convince Scarabino and his family to move, right? And that's something that we talk about within the book too, about the witness security program. I think the public has this notion that you go into the program and you get new ID, you go to a new state, but there are facilities throughout the country that you do have to go to jail for a while, and that's something that we talk about within the book too. But, and then what happens is we just have people start to cooperate with the government, and that just leads to more indictments. So you constantly go through that. People are pleading guilty. And then there's the trial aspect. So where people don't plead guilty, and then you have to go to trials. And I think from December 2002 up until November 2003, I think we had almost 4 trials during that time frame. And I was part of all those particular trials. And trial is very demanding, but trial is where you learn. That's the best time to learn things, and it's 24/7 because people don't realize it's not like you just show up and go to trial. And the difference between the state and the Fed is it's like the agents actually sit at the trial. So there's trial prep. There's stuff that goes on after the day at trial where you're going to prep a witness. You might have to speak to someone that you might call the next day. So it's constant. And if I remember correctly, even in 2003, there was a blackout. So we had to deal with that at a trial as well. So we
Oh,
talked,
I don't remember
yeah, there was
that.
the whole East region was blacked out. It was in August of 2003, and actually Anthony Capo was on trial, was testifying at a trial that day.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, so there's some stories related to that if you
Well,
buy the book.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you may have answered this already, but was there a pivotal moment that changed the course of this investigation? You may have answered that.
Well, I think when he decides to cooperate is a big deal because that puts it in motion where because he cooperated, that kind of opened up the floodgates to have other people cooperate. As I said, we had Vincent Palermo was a businessman, so he made that decision to cooperate. So then after him, we have Victor, who was an associate, Scarabino, an associate. Then we have Anthony Rotundo cooperated, who was a captain. Then we also have a guy, Tommy DeTora, who was arrested initially in December of 1999. He's looking at all this and he's seeing that all these people are cooperating. And he, remember that one of the two events that I mentioned earlier on, the second one about the murder of Joseph Canigliaro? Well, Tommy DeTora was part of that murder. So Tommy DeTore gets arrested in December of 1999, not for that murder, and he's out on bail. And he's seeing that all these people are cooperating with the government, and he has spoken to them about that murder. So he makes a decision to cooperate. He's out on bail. So what we do with him is we probably make one of the best consensual recordings the FBI ever had, where we send him out, we get all the participants that were involved in the murder of Joseph Canigliaro together, and they talk about their role in the murder. It's one of the best recordings ever, which we were able to play at trial. And, if you buy the book and you read it, but one of the things that they talk about is the shooter shoots him. Joe Pitts was his nickname. Joe Pitts, as I mentioned before, was in a wheelchair. He had his car designed so that he could drive. The shooter shoots him. Joe Pitts drives away, gets up to the top of the block in Brooklyn, puts his signal on, and drives himself to the hospital. So you can just imagine hitting play at trial and listening to this, where you have the shooter on tape saying this, that I couldn't believe it. He got to the top of the block and put his signal on and drove himself to the hospital. That was priceless for trial.
Yeah, that
So that
had to be
was, yeah, so
powerful.
that was probably one of the best recordings we ever had. And, on his way to the hospital, he stops by and picks up Joseph Brightson. Joseph Brightson was part of the murder conspiracy. So can you imagine Joseph Brightson's face when Joe Pitts, who had just been shot, stops by his house, beeps the horn, and basically is asking him to come downstairs and go to the hospital with him that he had just been shot. Joseph
That's
Brightson was part
wild.
of the murder conspiracy. He was shocked to see him that he's still alive.
That
So
is wild.
there's a lot of stories that happen at trial. Unfortunately, in that trial too, there was a NYPD detective who was arrested. So he's part of the trial, and I don't want to give away all the parts of the book,
No.
but there's great stories within each trial, which is I think it's worth it to read it.
Oh, no doubt, no doubt. Let me switch gears a little bit. So you were very early in your FBI career when you were assigned to this case. Can you talk about how this investigation just affected your life at the time?
Well, I was on the squad for about a year, and then as I said, usually when you're a new agent, you get tasked rear security. So I was very surprised that I was the team leader to arrest such a violent person. On a personal note, I was going through a lot at the particular time as well. My dad was sick and actually had passed just right after I had arrested Anthony Capo. So it was
Hmm.
a lot of personal stuff that I was trying to deal with at the time, just trying to keep it all together. But my life did change there because of when I flipped him. Trying to learn organized crime is not an easy thing to do. It takes time to do that. And I basically learned organized crime through Anthony Capo. And also watching George in that year, I try to be a sponge and just soak up as much as I possibly could. And thankfully, George was willing to teach me. So and then once we had that threat, that kind of had a bit of a jolt where you had to, like, of course, being an agent, there are threats, but this became really live, right? It became really real where, this is something, instead of when you're just trying to hear about it, it's actually going to happen. And when you're speaking to the person who's got the contract, who, by the way, I just spoke to about a week or so ago, it's kind of, it makes it real. So that's how things changed, and it kind of affected me for the rest of my life in the sense is how you deal with these people. And I went on, again, not just me, but the teams that I had, but went on to be very successful where, in essence, the teams are part of teams to dismantle three families, where we had the Bonannos, the DeCavalcantes, and then I went on to be supervisor of the Colombo squad as well.
Yeah, as a somebody who was stuck in the office all the time, I remember just watching you and the other agent just the witness handling process. It's by no means a 9 to 5 job. I remember the conversations you had. I remember the like almost being therapy for some of these sources. It becomes much more involved than just answering, meeting with them, getting the information, and trying to keep them protected as well. Can you tell
Well,
me more about how the witness handling
well,
process was for you?
Well, two is you can't pick your family, right? So I say that all the time. And these witnesses have families. So you're always trying to look out for the family so that they're not scarred because unfortunately, a lot of these witnesses' families don't know what they're involved in. So you become a social worker. And we dealt with so many families, from the Bonanno side, the DeCavalcante side. You're constantly trying to do that. And just like the witness process, right? So first you would proffer them, right? And what that means is they come in and they have to tell you all their crimes, not just the crimes that they're charged with. And you're trying to assess if they're telling you the truth. And they can't hide information. And then they proffer, which leads to a cooperation agreement where they would plead guilty to all their crimes. And that's kind of that's something where they have to trust you, right? Where initially Anthony Capo might have been exposed to, say, to close to 30 years. And now he comes forward. And I remember when he came in and he proffered, the three things that he told us about was that there was a leak in the Southern District, right? That's why he wasn't home,
Right.
because they had a leak. There was an alleged court reporter who was feeding them information. The second thing he tells us about is the murder of Fred Weiss. Fred Weiss was a businessman from Staten Island who happened to get involved in the waste business with the Gambino family. He was killed on September 11th of 1989. And the third thing that he tells us about that he was the shooter in the John D'Amato murder. So that's a big step for him to tell us that because now he's just exposed himself to a life sentence.
Yeah.
So those are the three things that he tells us about in his initial proffer. So we have to decide, is he telling us the truth? And here I am, I'm sitting in a proffer with George Hanna, Kenny McCabe, legendary Southern District investigator, and
Yeah.
myself. And again, I'm brand new and I'm on the job for a year and I'm hearing about, instead of me trying to read about the Gambino family and Gotti and Sammy the Bull, this guy is telling me about it, that John Gotti ordered the murder of Fred Weiss. So it was surreal to me. Excuse
That's
me.
wild.
So
That's wild.
these are the three things that he tells us about right off the bat. And as I said, then I start to learn organized crime from Anthony Capo. And that's how you start to handle the witness. And it was just surreal to me, but that's how I learned organized crime. I learned it through him. And, you learn not to judge people. That's the biggest thing, and that's what I learned throughout my entire life. And we've heard it all from everything that they've done.
Well, you can't get much closer to the action than that. Somebody who's actually living it and has lived it.
And the thing about Fred Weiss is the reason that they killed him is because pure paranoia. John Gotti thought that he was cooperating with the government on pure speculation because Fred Weiss switched lawyers. That was the only reason. And unfortunately, he was not cooperating with the government. So he killed him for no reason. Very sad.
Save some stuff for us to read in the book, man.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot in there just related to that,
So let
trust
me
me, a
ask
lot
you
more
a
there.
question that might relate with a lot of people who have watched the
Mm.
series Sopranos. Like, how does the story in your book mirror the events from that series? Were there similarities? Were there differences?
Sure. How they're the same is in the first season, if you watch the show, the boss, Jacob Priel, dies of stomach cancer. In real life, Jacob Maury dies of stomach cancer in June of 1997. So that's right off the gate, right? Then there's so many aspects between the two. There's a lot of union aspects within the show. In real life, the DeCavalcante family controlled Local 394, which was the labor union. The DeCavalcante family created Local 1030, which was the asbestos union. We actually had a consensual recording. The show started in January of 1999. We have a consensual recording in March of 1999 where we have the DeCavalcante made members talking about the show, and they're saying, "This is you, this is you." So that was priceless for trial. You have the strip club angle, right? So Vincent Palermo, who was viewed as the boss of the family, the acting boss of the family, he had a strip club in Queens. It was Wiggles. So that's another similarity
Yeah.
between the two.
Yeah.
They had a meat market in the show. There's a real life meat market in New Jersey that they used. It was called Sacco's. So there's so many similarities between both the show and real life. In the show, I think there's a record producer, and the same thing within the DeCavalcante family. There's a stock angle within the show. In real life, Philip Brahma was known as the Wizard of Wall Street. So there's so many things between the show that are spot on. So even though they say they weren't speaking to someone, the irony is that there's a lot of similarities between real life and the show.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. For Farhad, do you have anything to come on and ask questions? For Seamus and I have just been talking and talking and talking.
No, listen, I've been enjoying the discussion. So a couple of things. I always think about like process and just like I think about like when you joined the Bureau in 98, right? And
Yes.
this investigation happened right away, essentially, right? And you retired in 2019, right? And I'm not talking about politics or anything like that. I'm just talking about process standpoint, right? If fast forward to closer to the end of your career versus the beginning, right? How different does this investigation look, and do you think you achieve the same results just based on changes in the way things are done?
Well, I think what we had to do, right, is change the philosophy because we had Ralph, who was a proactive witness,
Mhm.
and then that led us to Anthony Capo, who was a historical witness. So they're providing us information, and all those witnesses that came after Anthony Capo were historical witnesses. And then we had trials. And during that time frame in the 2000s, all those shows started to come out. NCIS related to DNA and juries, they just didn't want to hear a witness talk about it. They wanted to see evidence,
Mm.
which we were able to show evidence, but they just didn't want to hear a witness get on the stand and talk about it. So after finishing that investigation, I was tasked to go down to C38 and run the Colombo squad. And when I went down there, my strategy was based upon the training that I got. And at that time, I had only had 6 years on the job. First of all, I thought I was way too young to be a supervisor. And I even told them that, but I was kind of voluntold to go down there. I really didn't have a choice. So I go down there and I said, okay, I'm going to hit the Columbos in two angles. I'm going to go towards the violent angle that they have and also towards their money. But I said, we can no longer just use historical witnesses. So what I want to do is I'm going to use proactive witnesses. And as I mentioned before, that's what I did for the next, I think, 7.5 years. I used proactive witnesses, and we made, I think, close to 1,800 recordings during that time period, which is an insane amount of recordings. Where the agents that we had, which were fabulous. They were working around the clock. And we were making so many recordings that even within our squad, we were downloading the recordings ourselves, flipping the devices we had because we had to, just to get them back out to the witness to make another recording. So the squad we had was just, they were so like savvy. It was amazing. And that's the philosophy that we had to change.
Mm,
I was on that squad up until from December 2004. My last act was in June of 2013, which ended with a high note there, where we recovered a body in Jimmy Burke's basement from the Goodfellas scene, where they had killed someone in 1969, and we recovered a body in 2013 there. So I was a supervisor there for about 9 years. And how things have changed is the Bureau had a philosophy where, or a procedure where you can only be a supervisor for 7 years,
mhm.
and you could either step up or step down. And I had no intention of going to headquarters at the time, so I decided to step down. And I was, I think, one of the few people who actually stepped down to work a case again. And at that time, there was a problem up in Mount Vernon where they had all these young gangs that were like they were hurting each other, and I was tasked to go and see if I could fix that problem up there. So I was assigned to a violent crime squad up in White Plains, and we used RICO again to kind of break up the violent gangs that they had up in Mount Vernon. And then towards the end of my career, I was getting close to retiring. So I was like, okay, I got to go back to my roots if I want to go work in the private sector again. And that's when I kind of went towards white collar. And I worked white collar for the last couple of years and kind of tried to specialize in fraud.
Yep, yep. No, I remember that well. By the way, I think you knew this, but I grew up across the street from where you guys dug up that body, by the way,
Oh,
essentially.
really?
Yeah, like I literally grew up on that street. So, all right. So I guess we're at the end of the show. And question I have for you is, what is life like on the other side of these investigations that you had? And have you ever been, or are you concerned about your life and safety? And is there anything you regret, or I guess perhaps would have done differently?
No, I don't think I fear for my safety. It's like I had worked them out for so long, and like one thing that I've always done is just treat them with respect. Early on as a new agent, as I said, there was that threat against law enforcement. So of course that was a jolt to us. But then, as I said, I worked at Columbus for so long, and I treated them with respect that, even talking to some of the wise guys, I think there's recordings out there where they kind of say that I'm a decent guy and that I know what I'm doing, and that I treat them with respect. And I've always been, if I had you, I had you. If I didn't, I didn't. Even if even if I knew that you did it and I didn't have you, I didn't have you. So, and plus, I think the mob knows, and they've really gotten smart the last 10 years or so, that if they were to hurt someone, the attention that they're going to get from law enforcement is just going to be crazy. So they kind of just generally have stopped trying to hurt people because they know that just attracts law enforcement attention. So, and it's like, the book doesn't go after anyone. It just speaks the truth. So,
Yep, yep, yep.
and
No,
you said any regrets? No, I don't have any regrets. I think I know, not this case, but I know tactically wise, there might have been a decision or two that I might have changed at a trial that I had. But other than that, because what happens is at trials, right, which I didn't even know until it happened, was I think the law is you can only have one agent at a trial. And usually you have two, which has always been the case. And we had a particular trial where the defense basically said, oh, no, you can only have one agent. And I was a very loyal person. And I let the loyalty get in the way, and I should have chosen the other agent. So that's the only thing that I actually, regret. And I've spoken to some of those defense attorneys after, and we had a conversation about that. And that's the only thing I kind of regret, where I should have chosen the other agent.
we really appreciate you joining us for that. We've been talking about this for a while, so I'm glad we got in early on this because I'm sure you'll be on a lot of other shows as well. So, thank you for your service. I can tell you firsthand that I understand the impact of everything that you're talking about because I grew up in an area where, the Gambino family essentially ran. And, it's obviously different now, right? Thanks to the efforts of yourself and many others. And so, uh, you know, Joe, thank you for joining us for this episode as well. I think it was meaningful to have you on and talk to Seamus. And, thank you both for the service and everything that you did for, certainly the New York City, New Jersey area, but really the country as a whole.
Happy to be a part of it. Happy to be here today. Seamus, always a pleasure to speak to you in any form or fashion. It was wonderful learning from you and seeing your growth at the Bureau as well, going from new, fairly new agent to supervisory positions, and how you treated your squad, your people, is always remembered by me and those around us. So thank you
Well,
again. I wish you the best of luck with your book and where your next step is.
well, thank you. It's been great to be here. It's always great to speak to you, Joe. Farhad, it will continue the partnership that we have, as always. Again, it's been great to be here. And the book is Flipping Capo: How the FBI Dismantled the Real Sopranos. Hopefully, you buy the book. A great team effort by our entire squad, and I can't say enough about C10.
Awesome. Well, we'll have contact information for Seamus as well as a link to the book in the description of the podcast. We'll also be advertising that on social media and doing some book giveaways. So stay tuned and thank you as always for the support. Keep tuning in, keep sending us the comments and suggestions, and until next time, have a great one.
Don't forget to follow us. We are on LinkedIn and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube.